Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello. I am so excited to be here with you this afternoon. I want to welcome you to the radical edge of HR. Today, we're going to talk about harassment part two and specifically discriminatory behavior. Hot topics, guys, hot topics. Well, my name is Tanya Hawley with HR Knowledge Source. And again, I'm so humbled and pleased to join you this afternoon. And we're super excited because we are now also on LinkedIn Live as well as Facebook Live. So we have hopefully a whole new audience we get to interact with. So welcome, welcome. One thing before we officially get started, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to say hello and post your comments and questions in the comment section, and we'll try and answer everything that we can today for the little bit of time that we have. So again, thank you for joining us. And before I introduce some very special people who are going to help me today, I've got a couple questions for you. So I want you to put on your little thinking cap and see what you think about this. And you can answer us in the comment section or just answer yourself if you want to, if you don't want to say anything. So I want you to think about this first question. Have you ever been asked at work if you're pregnant or if you have children? Question number one, think about it. Question number two, has anyone ever asked you in an interview or at work, I hear you have an accent. Where are you from? Might sound kind of innocent, huh? Not necessarily. And question number three, have you ever been asked, do you have a car to get to work? Now pay close attention to the words that I use in those questions because it has a lot to do with it. So just think about that. Today, we're going to explore how discrimination can show up for a candidate on a job from an employer standpoint and also as an employee. And so I am really excited to introduce you to the experts that I have with me that are going to just give you a lot of knowledge today. And I'm going to introduce each one of them and let them tell you a little bit about themselves. So first up, I have none other than the amazing Miss Artie Harrison. Yay!
Hello, how are you doing, Tanya? Good to be with you.
It's great to be here with you again. Can you just tell them a little bit about yourself, please?
Absolutely. Well, I'm Artie Harrison, and I'm a senior director with HR Knowledge Source. I'm also an executive life and a coach. I'm very excited about that. I've been in HR for over 25 years, so touched every part of HR, employee relations, you name it. So very excited about being here today and really jumping in on this topic today. There's so much to discuss.
Yes, there is. Thank you, Artie. So, panelist number two, the magnificent Miss Monique King. Hey, Monique.
Hello, Tanya. Good afternoon, Artie.
Good afternoon, Monique.
Monique, can you tell everyone just a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. As Tanya said, my name is Monique King. I am a senior consultant with HRKS. Also, I have over 25 years of experience, like Artie, in human resources, supporting several industries. So lots of experiences in different arenas of HR. I'm also a certified executive and personal coach and international mentor.
Ooh, sounds good. And last but not least, and you know, they say you save the best for last. I'm not going to say that because I've got two of the best right here. So we got the third bestest, if that's the word. The third bestest. Please help me welcome Mr. Troy Felder, our special guest panelist. Welcome, Troy.
Awesome. Hey, thank you for that, Tanya. Welcome to Artie and to Monique as well. I don't mind being the third bestest today. I appreciate you all inviting me to join you. As Tanya stated, my name is Troy Felder. I am the president and CEO of the National Association for African Americans in Human Resources, the Atlanta chapter. Served on the board now for about 3 years. I've actually been active in the organization going on 6 years. That's what I do. I guess at night, by day, I'm also a senior HR business partner for a Fortune 10 healthcare manufacturer and distributor. And so just really excited about this content, this topic, and engaging with my two panelists.
And thank you so much, Troy. So thank you all for being here on behalf of HR Knowledge Source, of course. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We don't have a lot of time, but we want to give as much knowledge as we can. So let's just kick off with the topic, and we have several topics for everyone that we're going to talk about and give examples. So the first one we want to touch on is religion. Can you please tell me, I'll start with Artie, how someone can be harassed or discriminated against as a result of their religion?
Yeah, that's a great segue. That is such a common area that it happens a lot in, and there's a particular example with the client. It had to do with religion, and as we know, the hijab, as it's pronounced, it's tied to religion, and it's worn by Muslim women, and primarily they wear it to maintain their modesty and their privacy from what they consider to be unrelated males. In this particular scenario, the Muslim employee was wearing her hijab to work, and she was being harassed by employees. They were asking her things like, "Let me see your hair underneath there. What does your hair look like? Why do you wear that to work?" And she didn't feel as though she needed to answer those questions because it was very disruptive to her ability to perform her job. She complained to no one because she was ashamed of the fact that she would even have to be addressed like that. Unfortunately, even though she was a great employee, she ended up resigning. And so the HR individuals only found out in the exit interview her true reasons for being harassed, but she felt like she was dealing with that on a regular basis and felt that she was being cited out from all the other employees because she was exercising her rights to demonstrate her religious freedoms. And so, we need to be really conscious of those types of scenarios when it does happen, which for her, she felt harassed.
Hmm.
Utilize the resources that are available, which is to go to HR and talk about it, even if it's in confidentiality. But that is a right that an employee has to exercise their religious freedoms in the workplace. So that's a real example that has happened.
Wow, that's a great example. And I'm just wondering, is there a difference between someone asking that question to her out of curiosity versus harassing? Is there just a fine line? Is it how she perceived it? Or, it
Yeah.
seems like somebody might just be curious and ask that question.
Yeah, and that's a great question because curiosity could be on the other end of that question. But for the recipient who has an assumption that I'm a Muslim, this is my religion, and being asked those types of questions for her felt harassing because it wasn't just that question alone. There were other questions that were being asked of her that she felt invasive. And in
Mm,
that, from that perspective, if this is this distraction, now she's thinking twice about coming to work in a way that she's regarded for all of her life. So for her, the
mhm,
recipient, it wasn't as much curiosity because it was compiled with a multitude of different questions by
I see.
people at different times. Yeah,
I see. And I'm sure it could have also been not what they asked, but how they asked it.
exactly. And
Yeah.
her trying to perform her job, she honestly didn't file a complaint because she was afraid.
Mhm.
So she just left the job.
Wow. Thank you for that. Monique, did you have another example of religion?
I don't, but what I definitely like to just add to that just a bit
Okay.
in that it is, you asked the question about the curiosity, right?
Mhm.
And this is a continuation of what we were talking of our series about the silence of harassment. And that's a great example of the silence of harassment. So oftentimes when people are different from what is considered the norm in the workplace,
Mhm.
harassment comes because you are being asked over and over again about something. It's one thing to ask somebody because you're curious and you want to know and you get an answer. But then when it becomes habitual, and if it's the same offender or a group of offenders, that's when it crosses over into harassment. And too
Mhm.
often times, where you have resources in place to help that individual and stop that behavior. Again, this is an example of someone being silenced because of something that they believe in and something that they have a right to do at work, but did not feel comfortable, felt more overwhelmed by the masses. And why that's why it's very important to educate people on
Mhm.
how HR can certainly help you with those situations, because we don't want anybody to feel isolated because they are practicing a belief that is for them.
And to that point, also, even though HR found out after the fact, it actually sent a message to them about the need for internal training and
Mm.
being able to accept people in their belonging, whatever that looks like for them, and their religious freedom. So it was an eye opener for them as well.
Yes, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to second. We got several we want to get to. So let's move on to the second topic we have, which is national origin. What can harassment look like? I'm going to give this one to Troy for national origin.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. As it relates to national origin, oftentimes you'll have individuals that are seeking employment, and as employers, we actually have the ability to accept immigrants for work in the U.S. But there are special qualifications. First, they must have at least a bachelor's degree. They must adhere or be able to demonstrate that they have some specialist skills. If we kind of go back in time, when there was talk about locking down the borders, it was the medical community and these tech companies that were the first that were up in arms, because oftentimes that's where they bring in these specialists, accountants, architects, civil engineers, data scientists. And so that's where you'll see that type of discrimination is oftentimes in the application process, because you want to make sure that if you are posting a role, you actually have the ability not to hire someone that requires H-1B sponsorship. But again, if you have a role that you're going to post and it does demonstrate you need work experience that is going to be able to afford you to tap into some specialist skills, then you can act very differently. And so in my life, I've supported IT shared services, yes, and been responsible for H-1B sponsorships, but I've primarily cut my teeth in my 11 years of HR in retail management, manufacturing, and distribution. And oftentimes that's where you'll see these things kind of crop up. And you really have to be careful as an employer, as an HR practitioner, that roles are posted, they're being sourced, and more importantly, individuals that apply are being properly dispositioned in your applicant tracking system.
Mm-hmm. Great. Troy, I want to ask you this. I'm sorry. Were you about to say something, Artie?
Yeah, actually, if I may, piggybacking on what Troy was saying,
Sure.
a lot of times in interviews, sometimes unintentionally, an interviewer might ask, where are you a U.S. citizen, or what country are you from, or where is that accent from? The better question to ask to avoid violations is just ask them, if you are hired, are you able to prove or provide documentation that you are eligible to work in the U.S. That gets you around all the other questions, and it's a job-related question. So just wanted to share that as well.
And so two things. First, Artie, to piggyback or just to ask the question. So what you just responded to and how you said that, what I'm hearing is it's not necessarily always what you say, it's the words you choose to say, it's how you choose to say it. Because
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, like the question I had asked in the beginning was, if you ever been asked, do you have a car to get to work? And we were talking about that offline. And the other way of saying that was, do you have reliable transportation? So this, what Troy and you were both saying, what I'm hearing is sometimes it's the words you choose. You have to be careful with the words you choose from an employer perspective.
Absolutely. 100% of the time, you need to be careful about the words that you choose. It may have the same meaning, but the words are what truly matter. So you're absolutely right. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And Troy, what I was going to ask you is for those that may not be familiar with what national origin means, can you just explain that? I should have asked that in the beginning, but there may be some people that are watching and listening that may not really understand what that term means. Can you explain that a little bit, please?
Sure. And it's very different than ethnicity. So national origin is essentially where your nation of birth, where were you born? Where do you have original citizenship? And so going back to Artie's clarifying response is we can ask the question of whether you're authorized to work in the USA. It has no bearing on where you were born. That's really what we need to know from an employment standpoint, is if you're authorized to work here now. And again, a lot of employers will bring in specialists in order to work in this country, because there is a gap, quite honestly, in terms of those technical and even in the medical field.
Okay.
And I want to throw a wrench in that too.
Okay.
Because what I think we all can attest to is oftentimes we see the need for training of our leaders, because I don't care the industry that I've been in, I've seen where people have moved up because they're very good technically in their skill set, but they don't have the people management skills. And a lot of times that people management skill bleeds into HR knowledge because you are
Mm.
the front line and you're addressing people every day. And so those are the ones that we're often partnering with, but we don't we want managers to reach out to us before the fact and not after the fact. And where I was saying about throwing a wrench into that is that you still have to be careful because every person that's applying for a job, they're going to fill out an I-9 form. And that question is going to be asked on that form. And it's asked on that form because it's asking you very specific questions to answer, validating that you are able to work in the US and providing those documents. It's nothing wrong with asking that question in an interview, but where it does become a problem, again, is if you have a manager, because a person doesn't look like a US citizen, may only be asking those people that don't look that way. And so now you're still targeting and you're finding a roundabout way to ask a question because it puts a person in a place to say, well, yes, I am eligible, or no, I'm not. So leaders have to be very careful of that. If you do ask that question, that you are very consistent in asking it to every applicant so that it's
Mm.
not, well, hey, you only ask this of people that don't look like their national origin is the US.
Mm.
Oh, that's a great point. And if I could add, that's exactly right. What I would coach my leaders on is if you're going to ask it of one, you have to ask it of all. You just can't ask it of those that may have a name that's difficult to pronounce.
Right.
And so I know a very similar thing would happen with assessments. They would only give assessments to certain candidates. If you're going to give it to one, you must give it to all. But then in a lot of ways, we want to avoid assessments altogether if it's not a part of the formal application process.
And to not to belabor this point, but literally, I facilitated a training for managers specifically about interviewing, and it was amazing for them to realize how many questions they were asking that were sending them down a rabbit hole that they couldn't come out of. And as I put them in scenarios, they realized I shouldn't ask this question anymore because I'm discriminating. I didn't even realize it. So whether it's unintentional or not, it still falls under the umbrella of discrimination.
Mm. Wow. Thank you all for that. That was good. We have a couple people saying hello, making comments. Tamiko's here. Hello, Tamiko. Tanya Young is also here. Hi, Tanya. Thank you all for joining us. Tanya says silent harassment is sadly very real. Yes, it is, Tanya. Thanks for that comment. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is cultural geographic. Does anyone want to go ahead and dive in on this one? What it may look like?
Sure. This is one that had an example that came to mind as well, Tanya. And so, oftentimes coming off of our very last topic, you may be dealing with someone that may have English as a second language. But then once we get past that application, we get into the onboarding phase. We're still maybe dealing with a language barrier, a cultural differences in terms of availability, in terms of maybe a male dealing with a female. But what I've seen come up more often in my experience has been when you have cultural holidays that come around. And so you have these holidays that have a very great connection, first off, to food. And maybe even though you almost see this in the African American community as well, where that's what people's first thought is. And that is something that even if you're talking about someone of East Indian descent, it doesn't always begin there. It begins with their spirituality. And I know we've had a lot of challenges in my professional career around scheduling breaks around not only Ramadan, but also their ability to pray and making prayer rooms available, making space available. And so what we would do, again, as an employer, is because you don't want to isolate or call out a specific group. We would actually make these rooms available. It was clear to that specific group that they could access it, but that room was actually made available to anyone. And so that's really that workaround, if you will. Yes,
Okay.
it is going to be dedicated. It's well aware that primary use is going to be for prayer as a prayer room. But if you need to just go and meditate, you just need some quiet time. But that's what that room is going to be set aside for, and that's how we were able to quell a lot of the questions and angst that came up around that dedicated space.
Okay. And so were there employees that had an issue with that, with that room?
Oftentimes there would be. It's something that died down over the years. When we first made that change, it was a storage room that was used for ancillary items that probably had a better home somewhere else. But because of the proximity, centrally located in our building, it made sense. Because of the square footage of the room, it made sense. And so it was just the only other piece was just educating our managers, supervisors around that time, how long it would be, and more so the purpose and significance of it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Troy. Artie or Monique, did you either one of you want to add anything to that? No?
No, I would piggyback what he's covered it very, very well. This is a great example about how cultural geographic differences can really play a part in it. So great examples, Troy.
And I think the only thing that I would add is that, you know, the world has become even more so multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be incumbent upon employers to make sure that they do more things to embrace differences in the workplace and those cultural differences. For example, for sure, many organizations now have what they call, they have a different letter in front of it, but it's ends up being the resource group, and they're specific to those differences in people. And so companies are doing things so that people can be comfortable being who they are at work. But oftentimes those people that are in those groups are specific to those groups. So how does an organization then embrace them and do things like recognizing Cinco de Mayo, recognizing Ramadan, and those different things?
Right.
Because all of the holidays that we have in the US right now are all American holidays. So what can we do from an organizational standpoint to culturally to show, other than just giving people places to lump up together? But that's definitely a start.
Yeah.
Yes. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Monique makes a good point about comfort level. I know actually in a situation that I'm dealing with now is because I mentioned training and onboarding. We have individuals that where English is a second language, and they're not comfortable because there isn't someone that's training them using maybe even their native language in order to be able to acclimate, to orient to the organization. And so, if you're talking about a language foundational to the U.S. as Spanish, how do you not in 2021 have a Spanish speaking leader that can then onboard entry level employees? That was surprising and is a challenge and a gap that we're looking to close. Now, at the same time, in this one facility, Hindi is another language that we're looking to onboard employees on, because our philosophy is, especially at this site, is we're trying to screen people in as opposed to screening them out. And so now we have a challenge where, of course, Spanish is already there. It's sad that we're not equipped as we should be, but Hindi is where we're moving to next, again, to get people comfortable and make ourselves truly a destination and the best place to work.
Yeah,
great.
Artie? I was just going to share, just in terms of the cultural, geographic, and the differences to really minimize some of the discrimination that can occur is really heightening the awareness of the employees. That's one of the things that HRKS has done. For example, for some of our clients, we have a cultural newsletter, we'll call it, once a month, where we share some of the cultural activities, give some backgrounds about, educating employees about the different celebrations. So there's a connection for the employee. So I know we're talking solutions because we're talking problems, but that is something to consider as well.
Yes, thank you, Artie. And what I was just going to mention is there's that topic of diversity again. I want everyone to know we're going to get to that. That's going to be one of our topics for Radical Edge of HR, but it's so broad. We're going to get to it, though. So make sure you keep tuning in and watching us. Okay, so next we have, this is a good one, age. What does harassment and discrimination look like in this area? Age. I think, Monique, you had a good example of this one, and then there were some other topics that fall under that.
Yeah, I do. It's one that can be very silent, right? Because if people don't, sometimes people try to guess your age by looking at you directly, and you can't always tell that. But again, going back to the training of the managers, I did have a situation years ago where I received a phone call, and the person on the end of the line said, "Hey, I was applying for a position in such and such place. I supported regional locations." And they said, "I believe I was discriminated against." And I said, "Well, in the interview?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what makes you think that?" And they said, "Well, the person that was interviewing me asked me how old I was, and I don't think they can ask me that in an interview." And I want to be very clear about one thing too. It's interesting. You have many leaders that may be disconnected about policies and laws and rights, but you best believe the employees know them. They absolutely do know them, because they want to make sure that they're not being, whether they speak up or not, they know when something is wrong. And so um, what I did is I reached out to that leader, and we pulled the resumes at first that was sent in. And sure enough, he had written on the resume the person's age and put not too many years left. And it
Wow.
seems, and so looking at that, you think, my gosh, you should know better. And having the conversation with the leader, he really thought that he was thinking about the whole team, and he had gone through lots of turnover with people, and he was trying to stabilize the team. And so I guess he assumed that this person was older, and so he just asked. And so his writing of not too many years left was more so aligned with, he may be retiring soon, he may not want to work much longer, and I want my team to be stable. Very innocent reason for asking the question, but very inappropriate, and creates liability for the organization by doing so. So oftentimes, and I think we talked about the intent versus the impact, is really teaching leaders about the impact of the questions that they have. There is just while we're on the subject, I think we were talking when we were having this conversation the other day, was whether or not, when you're filling out, when you're completing your resume, how much experience that you put on there. Some
Yes.
people will try to have a one pager because they feel like, well, I want to condense everything on one page. Then another person wants to put everything that they've ever done on their resume.
Yes.
That's a tricky one, because it really depends on the job that you're applying for and what it positions you best for. And I can say, even with my own self, as I said at the beginning of this call, I've got over 25 years of experience. Some people will tell you, well, you only need to go back 7 years. Well, I did that on one of my resumes, and I just decided to do it just to see, okay, well, I don't need to. My resume is 3 pages long. On the flip side of that, the person that I was interviewing with told the recruiter that they were concerned that I didn't have enough years of experience.
Oh.
And so I wasn't highlighting all of my experience. And so I think you have to approach your resume from the standpoint of what's selling you the most. You may have transferable skills that you're looking for in a job. And you can, if you don't put all of your years of experience on your resume, then put that in a cover letter to say, I've done these things, so that it highlights the things that you've done that may not be conveyed on your resume. Because I certainly wouldn't suggest that a person intentionally not put all of their experience on their resume for the fear of someone's going to look at it and say, oh, they've been working for a very long time, because you got those dates there. Because you have to, I think you approach it based on that particular position and what you're highlighting about yourself, and also using a cover letter to bring up experiences that you have that may not be conveyed, that you don't want to convey through all the other experiences on your resume.
Yeah, that's great information. You know, as she was talking, I was thinking about, as we were discussing the age discrimination, which of course is an actual federal act, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, which it's meant to protect applicants and employees 40 years and older from discrimination. And that's on the basis of their age, or their hiring, or promotions, discharging, or compensation, or terms of conditions of privilege, for example. And so instead of, in an interview, for example, and this is around the idea of trying to avoid discrimination, instead of asking, well, when did you graduate? Which is another way to try to get around how old you might be, or when do you intend to retire? Is another way to do that. Maybe the better question to ask, that's still legal, is, do you meet the minimum age requirements for the job? Or you could say, can you supply transcripts for your education? because you're just trying to validate maybe the degree. But you have to be careful because the discrimination can not only occur after you're an employee, but also in the employment stages as well. So I just wanted to share that information too.
Thank you, Artie. I never thought of the transcript one.
Tanya, I actually had an example that came to mind within the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And, we hear a lot of talk around all we have 5 generations potentially working in the workplace. Personally, I've come to believe that millennials, whatever the latest and youngest group is not much different than the boomers. They want the same things. It's just that the millennials may be more vocal about it. But if you're talking about autonomy, if you're talking about flexibility at work, if you're talking about career aspirations, development, tools, and resources, again, they want the same things. But when you're talking about these groups all being in the workplace at the same time, where we can get into trouble and where it could lead to harassing behavior is with the continued advent of technology. And so you may have a boomer that has been a consistent performer, maybe rated as core talent. They may not see themselves or would classify themselves or anyone else as a high potential, which could relate to being promoted and relocated, things of that sort. But as core talent that has delivered over the years, now you're asking them to do these different things. And if they are willing to learn and grow, great. But if not, you have to be careful as a leader to not call them out in meetings, to not give unrealistic asks, to turn around deadlines and projects, things of that sort. And so that has been the one dynamic that has come into play and is closely related to age when you're talking about the advent of technology and the pace of work nowadays.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Troy, twofold, because you said that not having the time to turn around, right? Because you can have, and I've had situations where a person may assume that they were terminated because of their age and they didn't have the certain skill sets. And I think we're going to run into that more and more because of technology, because technology is just getting more and more advanced. And in that's also a very slippery slope, because a person they don't have an advantage because they're older. Things are changing in business. People are in business to make money. So sometimes there's a case where a person may not be performing, may not want to change. I worked in an industry, in the entertainment industry and television, and we all know that television went to digital, right? So I remember sitting in front of people and they were saying, "Oh my gosh, you're laying off." And I've been here all these years. And so the response then was, well, unfortunately, if we don't change and get with the technology of today, we're all going to be without jobs. And your competition, it's about your skill set, and your competition is out there. We're, saying out. So you've got to also come along. So I think that just from the standpoint of also knowing that, because people know that you can be discriminated against because of your age, that you can't use that also as a crutch to say, well, they let me go because I'm not as savvy on this, or I'm not as savvy on that. I'm not as smart as the younger people. You have to come along with it as well. And organizations certainly do have they should provide what you need. But I just wanted to point that out, that because people will assume that, well, they just got rid of me because I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to do that.
Thanks, Monique. Wow, this is some really good information, everyone. I hope everyone watching is enjoying this, or those that watch later will get some great tips from this panel discussion. So in closing, can you believe we went through a half hour that quick? In closing, can you just share, and I think, Artie, you actually hit on it a little bit earlier, what do you do if you're in any of these situations? Where do you go? What do you do as an employee, and you're experiencing this? What should you do from the employee perspective? And then we can talk about the employer as well.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely, Tanya. That is a great question. So if you are an employee faced with any of these potentially discriminatory situations, your first go-to should be honestly to HR. Sometimes it could be the supervisor that could be considered the harasser, or the one that may be doing the discrimination. So you may not obviously be comfortable going there. So go to your HR department and talk through what you've experienced. Don't belabor it. Talking to your peers doesn't get any resolve as much as it carries on and makes the situation worse. So that would be your first go-to, particularly if you're experiencing it and you're still the employee there and you want to remain there. Don't be like the employee who was dealing with the religious challenges and ended up just leaving the job. At least give that a try. That would be the first suggestion that I would make. And sometimes when you're dealing with this, the employers may have EAP programs because it can have an emotional impact on the employees as well. And you need some counseling that helps you to deal with what you're experiencing and how it's impacting you. So those are some other issues for consideration.
Thank you, Artie. Anything else, Troy or Monique, or did she cover it all with that?
That's it from the employee perspective.
Okay. I did have a question that actually popped up. I'm going to get that in right quick. Tanya Young is asking, what recommendations do you have for employers that find coy ways of discriminating against employees of age or national origin?
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to what Artie was saying. It's always go to HR. And I have to say this with, I don't know what the word I want to put in front of it, but I know my colleagues here, having been in HR for a while, you're very familiar with the fact that many times employees will say, I don't want to go to HR. HR supports the organization. I don't trust HR. HR has a due diligence to mitigate risk for the company, and that means if an employee is being discriminated against, you still have to mitigate that risk. If it turns out that there is discrimination, the HR, our role is to uncover that. And HR is skilled in conducting interviews and asking very specific questions. So to your question, Tanya, it really doesn't matter. Most times when people are discriminating, they do it with in coy ways and sneaky behind the back ways. They don't typically, the ones that are innocent are the ones their intent was different. But there are many that they are going to find ways because of their biases to discriminate. So that is why it's very important if you go to your manager and nothing is done, or if you come straight to HR. HR is more skilled to be able to ask very pointed questions about situations to understand whether or not a person has been discriminated. And that's why this whole panel for these last two sessions have been on the silence of harassment and discrimination in the workplace, because oftentimes employees don't feel that they will get the right answer or supported if they go to HR, no matter how many times we tell them. But that is your best defense, is to speak with an HR, have your facts, and be able to communicate those so that the situation can be investigated.
I think Monique gave a great segue to a future topic around overt biases and microaggressions. So I heard that, biases, absolutely.
And if I can maybe offer one other point, there was around what we've talked about a lot today is illegal and mandated against at the federal, state, and local level. But where you'll also find is in a company's handbook, they've written a code of conduct. And so what makes this doubly important, and what oftentimes gets the book thrown at them, is not only they're not following the law, but they're not following their own policies. And so from a code of conduct and ethics standpoint, there oftentimes is going to be an ethics hotline. And so that's another avenue in order for you to find recourse. Because going above that supervisor, maybe even going above HR, that ethics hotline is going to be managed by a third party. And then that report is going to be escalated to most likely a VP or senior VP within the organizational structure. And if there is something systemic that's going on, you're talking about these coy and consistent ways of discriminating and harassing against employees, that may be fleshed out by that senior executive being put on notice because they also have a right to response.
Very good. Thank you, Troy. Well, thank you all, my expert panelists, for joining me this afternoon and dropping some knowledge on everybody. I'm sure you all enjoyed it as much as I did. It was a learning experience for me as well. So those of you that are watching, if you have any further questions or you need some information, especially employers, if you need some help or information or have any questions about what we discussed or need some HR help in general, please feel free to contact HR Knowledge Source. You can go to our website, which is hrknowledgesource.com, all our social media outlets, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We're out there at HRKS LLC. Feel free, if you have a question, contact us, any of those things. We'll be happy to help you because at HR Knowledge Source, we know HR. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you. Thank you, Artie. Thank you, Monique. And thank you, Troy. I appreciate your time. We appreciate all of you for watching and joining us. If you have suggestions on a topic you would like us to discuss here at the Radical Edge of HR, be sure you contact us and let us know. And we'd be happy to have a discussion about it. Thank you all so very much. We'll see you next time at the Radical Edge of HR. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.